The Bay of Biscay stretched out on that July afternoon, and somewhere among those grey-green waters, death was approaching at better than 200 miles per hour. It was July 12, 1943, and Marine Stab Sergeant Paul Faffinger stood gripping the cold metal of the conning tower rail aboard U-441. 3 RAF fighters dropped through the afternoon haze like hawks descending on prey, their cannon fire already raking the submarine's hull. The doctor had never commanded anything in his life. His world had always been the medical ward, the careful work of healing, not war. Now he watched in frozen horror as Captain Lieutenant Klaus Hartmann, the submarine's commanding officer, was struck by shrapnel. Blood spread across the bridge plating. The diving alarm never sounded. There would be no crash dive that day. 30 seconds. That's all it took. 30 seconds of pure chaos on that exposed bridge, and everything changed. 10 men lay dead or dying. 13 more suffered wounds ranging from superficial to catastrophic. Every officer aboard, including the captain himself, was either incapacitated or fighting shock. The only man standing with any semblance of command authority was a doctor whose entire naval training involved bandaging wounds, not maneuvering a damaged U-boat through enemy waters. The transformation from hunter to hunted had happened so fast nobody could quite believe it. Just 4 months earlier, in February of that year, things had been different. U-boat crews still possessed that crucial edge. Their METOX radar receivers could detect approaching aircraft in time to dive to safety with comfortable margins to spare. A boat would see the threat coming, sound the alarm, and descend beneath the surface while the aircraft was still miles away. By July, that world had evaporated entirely. Death now came without warning. What once was a 2 or 3 minute window for escape had compressed into mere seconds, the difference between life and the cold embrace of the Atlantic. The collapse had been stunningly rapid. The numbers told the brutal story of technological revolution. Throughout 1942, German U-boats had owned the waters around Britain. They sent over 1,000 merchant ships to the bottom. 7.8 million tons of shipping disappeared beneath the waves. Meanwhile, the Germans lost only 87 submarines. It was an exchange rate that had brought Britain to the very edge of starvation. The wolf packs were winning. 1 year later, everything had reversed with devastating completeness. By May of 1943 alone, the Kriegsmarine lost 41 U-boats while sinking just 34 merchant vessels. The technological equation that had favored Germany had flipped entirely. The collapse was so total that Admiral Karl Dönitz, who commanded the entire U-boat force, made the difficult decision to withdraw his submarines from the North Atlantic on May 24. It was an admission of defeat in the Battle of the Atlantic, a confession that the technological advantage had been lost. The cause lay in the compression of time. It was that simple and that devastating. The Type 7 U-boat, the backbone of the German submarine fleet, could execute a crash dive in 20 to 30 seconds under ideal conditions. It would nose down and reach 25 meters in roughly 35 seconds. These numbers looked good on paper. They meant nothing, however, if the submarine didn't know an aircraft was coming. When the Allies introduced centimetric radar in March of 1943, everything changed. The German detection equipment couldn't see this new technology. It was invisible to them. Suddenly, U-boat crews found themselves under attack before they even knew aircraft were in the sky. The safety mechanism that had protected hundreds of submarines became worthless when there was no time to activate it at all. The first indication of this shift came on August 27, 1942, in the clear waters of the Caribbean. Oberleutnant Hans-Joachim Hesse stood watch aboard U-94, scanning the skies from the conning tower. The METOX radar detector aboard, a French-made device designed to detect Allied radar pulses from 6 miles away, sat silent. Every instrument indicated they were alone on that patch of ocean. Then Hesse heard it. The distinctive drone of aircraft engines cutting through the afternoon air, and the engines were directly overhead. The lookout's cry sent the crew into motion. The race began. 15 seconds. That's all the time that passed from the moment someone spotted the American PBY Catalina until the order came to crash dive. 15 seconds wasn't enough. As the conning tower slipped beneath the surface, four 650-pound depth charges straddled the submarine, crushing inward against the pressure hull. The Catalina's pilot, Lieutenant Gordon Fiss of Patrol Squadron 92, had come from directly astern, using the submarine's blind spot to get in undetected. His report afterward contained two words that would haunt every U-boat commander for the next 3 years. Too late. The target attempted to crash dive, he wrote, but it was too late. Those two words captured the entire catastrophe that was coming. In the war's early years, the situation had looked completely different. U-boat commanders operated within comfortable safety margins. Standard procedures called for 4 lookouts on the bridge during any surface operation, each man assigned a specific sector of sky and sea to watch. On a clear day, men trained to spot aircraft could see them at 8 to 10 miles away. That provided 3 or 4 minutes of precious warning time. Captain Lieutenant Werner Hartenstein, commanding U-156, operated in the South Atlantic throughout 1942 and demonstrated how well this system worked. His lookouts caught approaching aircraft repeatedly and initiated crashes dives that beat the attacking aircraft every time. His war diary from September of that year recorded a typical encounter. Aircraft spotted at bearing 045 degrees, distance approximately 8 miles. Alarm sounded, crash dive initiated, the first depth charges exploded 90 seconds after the boat submerged, nowhere near the target. 90 seconds of margin. It was enough time for everyone to clear the tower, enough for the diesel engines to shut down properly, enough for the submarine to reach safe depth before the weapons arrived. The statistics from that era backed up the commander's confidence. Between February and October of 1942, U-boats transiting the Bay of Biscay completed 80% of their passages without ever encountering an attack. When they were caught on the surface, 90% of them crash-dived successfully before any weapons were released. Those odds looked good. Those odds felt safe. The introduction of ASV Mark II radar in early 1942 initially seemed manageable. The radar operated at a 1.7-meter wavelength and could detect a surface U-boat at 10 to 15 miles, but the German METOX receiver picked up the emissions easily. Radio operators developed an almost intuitive sense for the pulse patterns. When the pulses shifted from sweeping to steady, it meant the aircraft had locked onto them. This warning usually gave 2 to 3 minutes before the actual attack. Squadron leader Humphrey de Verdera. Lee identified a fundamental problem with night attacks on U-boats. Radar could track them to within a mile, but then the contact would vanish at precisely the moment when visual identification became necessary. The submarine would hear the aircraft engines and crash dive into the darkness, vanishing from sight. Lee developed an elegantly simple solution. He mounted a massive 22 million candela searchlight that could illuminate the target at the exact instant radar contact was lost. Suddenly, darkness became a liability instead of a shelter. The first operational Lee light attack came on June 4, 1942, when Squadron leader J.H. Greswell, flying Wellington L of 172 Squadron, illuminated the Italian submarine Luigi Torelli in the Bay of Biscay. The attack itself failed due to faulty timing on the depth charges, but the psychological impact was immediate and profound. Darkness no longer protected anyone. A month later, on July 5, 1942, Pilot Officer W. Howell of 502 Squadron caught U-502 on the surface. Captain Lieutenant Jürgen von Rosenstiel, commanding the boat, had less than 20 seconds from the moment the searchlight flicked on to when the depth charges hit the water. When U-502 went down, recovered documents showed the crew had been absolutely shocked. Night attacks, without warning? It violated every expectation they held. The Lee light compressed reaction time to almost nothing. A Wellington flying at 120 miles per hour covered the 1-mile gap between radar failure and weapon release in just 30 seconds. Subtract reaction time and dive initiation, and submarines had perhaps 15 to 20 seconds to get underwater. That wasn't enough to reach safe depth. By early 1943, Operation Derange deployed 131 aircraft equipped with Lee lights in coordinated patrols across the Bay of Biscay. Admiral Dönitz responded by reversing standard procedures entirely. Submarines were ordered to surface during the day and submerge at night. it merely shifted where the danger lay without actually eliminating it. March 1943 marked the actual turning point. The introduction of ASV Mark III radar, operating at 10-centimeter wavelength using cavity magnetron technology, was completely invisible to German detection equipment. U-boat crews began reporting attacks with absolutely no radar warning. This was supposed to be impossible according to German scientists, who insisted no radar could operate at such frequencies. U-333 became one of the first victims on March 6, 1943, while crossing the Bay of Biscay. Captain Lieutenant Peter Kremers sent an official report that sent shockwaves through U-boat headquarters. No METOX warning. Aircraft appeared directly overhead without any detection at all. The boat crash-dived under fire. Strafing caused severe casualties. Within weeks, similar reports flooded in from across the Atlantic. U-boats were being caught on the surface in broad daylight, at night in fog, conditions where they should have been invisible. The mathematics were brutal and inescapable. A B-24 Liberator equipped with ASV Mark III could detect a submarine at 15 miles and attack at 200 miles per hour. From first detection to weapon release took less than 5 minutes. Without warning, a U-boat might have 5 seconds from visual sighting to impact. That wasn't enough time to even sound the diving alarm. The psychological impact devastated the crews. Men who had trusted their detection equipment with their lives suddenly found themselves blind. Trust in technology evaporated overnight, replaced by paranoia and desperation. Some boats began diving at random intervals, hoping somehow to avoid being caught on the surface. By May of 1943, the Bay of Biscay had become what U-boat crews called the Valley of Death. Submarines leaving French bases faced an absolute gauntlet of aircraft, equipped with centimetric radar, lee lights, and newly developed weapons. In April and May alone, 56 U-boats were lost in just 2 months. Many of them sunk within sight of their home ports. The compression of warning time had enormous tactical implications that went far beyond individual survival. U-boats consumed enormous amounts of battery power, forced to crash dive repeatedly without adequate time to properly recharge. A Type 7 submarine could maintain 7.3 knots while submerged for just 1 hour before exhausting its batteries completely. Forced to surface to recharge the batteries, the boats immediately came under attack again. It was a cycle that couldn't be broken, a mathematical trap with no escape. The introduction of the Mark 24 FIDO acoustic homing torpedo added yet another lethal dimension to the equation. Dropped from as low as 200 feet at speeds up to 120 knots, this 680-pound weapon achieved a 22% success rate compared to only 9% for conventional depth charges. Once in the water, FIDO executed circular search patterns, homing directly onto the 24 kHz acoustic signature of submarine propellers. Between May of 1943 and the war's end, these weapons sank 37 submarines and damaged 18 more, often attacking U-boats that had successfully crash-dived beyond the range of conventional weapons. German attempts to restore the technological balance consistently arrived too late. The Naxos radar detector, introduced in September of 1943, could detect centimetric radar but only at ranges of 5 to 8 kilometers, nowhere near sufficient warning when aircraft approached at 300 kilometers per hour. The device's delicate construction frequently failed in combat conditions. The Schnorkel, adopted from captured Dutch designs and deployed operationally in early 1944, offered a partial solution by allowing submarines to run diesel engines while submerged. But this innovation came with severe limitations. Speed dropped to 6 knots. The diesel exhaust created a visible plume that could be spotted. The noise of engines running in the confined Schnorkel tube made acoustic detection of approaching aircraft impossible. Dönitz's desperate order of April 27, 1943, for U-boats to fight aircraft on the surface rather than dive proved disastrous. Selected Type 7 submarines were converted into anti-aircraft boats with enhanced armament. U-441's experience on July 12, 1943, demonstrated the futility when coordinated attacks by multiple aircraft overwhelmed submarine defenses despite the enhanced anti-aircraft weapons. Initially, U-boat crews refused to accept that their technological advantage had simply vanished. When U-333 reported being attacked without any radar warning in March of 1943, other commanders dismissed it as equipment failure or crew error. The German scientific establishment insisted that radar couldn't possibly operate at wavelengths shorter than 50 centimeters. Admiral Dönitz himself initially rejected reports of undetectable radar. His war diary from April 1943 shows his skepticism about what crews were reporting. This denial proved catastrophically expensive. Commanders who should have adapted their tactics continued operating as if the METOX provided adequate warning. U-175, U-192, and U-273 were all lost in April of 1943, while their crews maintained complete confidence in their radar detection equipment. As losses mounted exponentially, increasingly desperate measures emerged. The order to fight aircraft on the surface represented a fundamental break with everything submarine doctrine stood for. U-441's conversion to an anti-aircraft configuration added multiple cannons, but the July 12th attack showed exactly how futile this approach was when 3 Beaufighters overwhelmed the submarine's defenses, leaving 10 men dead and 13 more wounded. By autumn of 1943, even optimistic commanders accepted that the technological battle had been lost. The introduction of American escort carriers meant continuous air patrol even in the middle of the Atlantic. Kapitän-Leutnant Wolfgang Luth, one of Germany's most successful U-boat commanders with over 200,000 tons of shipping sunk, addressed the reality in his final patrol report. "The enemy can see us when we cannot see him. He can attack without any warning. Our survival now depends not on equipment or training, but purely on luck." The psychological shift was complete. U-boat crews that had once sung confidently in their boats now referred to their submarines as iron coffins. By 1944, the statistical life expectancy for a U-boat crewman was 3 patrols. Of 40,000 men who served in U-boats during the war, 28,000 would die. That was a 70% casualty rate, the highest of any service in any nation during World War II. The crash dive itself was a precisely choreographed emergency maneuver that required absolute perfection. The sequence began when the bridge watch spotted danger and hit the alarm button. The electric klaxons sent every crew member racing to their diving stations in rehearsed chaos. The bridge watch had to clear the conning tower in less than 12 seconds, sliding down the ladder in specific order. Control room operators opened the main ballast tank vents while simultaneously flooding the negative tank, a 70-ton auxiliary tank positioned forward in the boat. The bow planes went to maximum down angle, 30 degrees, and every available man in the crew ran forward to add weight to the bow section. The entire maneuver required split-second timing and perfect coordination. Too steep an angle and battery acid would spill out, creating deadly chlorine gas. Too shallow and depth charges would destroy them. American patrol aircraft exploited every single vulnerability in this process. The ASV Mark III radar operated at 9.1 gigahertz frequency with a wavelength of just 3.2 centimeters, completely invisible to German detection equipment. A functioning radar system could track a submarine sitting on the water's surface from as far away as 15 miles when conditions were ideal. The Lee light threw out 50 million candle power of illumination, and it activated automatically the instant radar showed a target had closed to within just 1 mile. Together, these two pieces of technology gave any submarine less than 25 seconds from the moment that brilliant light blinded their lookouts until bombs or depth charges would hit. The June 8, 1943 attack on U-758 showed clearly what this meant in practice. After the submarine had reported where convoy GUS-9 was positioned, south of the Azores, aircraft from USS Bogue's complement came screaming in at them. The U-boat sat there on the surface, completely exposed, for more than half an hour while the assault continued without pause. Men crammed into the gun positions tried to fight back with everything they had, while other crew members scrambled through the boat, preparing for an emergency dive. Only when the attacking force became simply too overwhelming did U-758 manage to slip beneath the waves. The boat limped back toward base, carrying 7 sailors who had taken wounds. On October 20th, 1943, the situation repeated itself when U-256 faced the same deadly scenario with aircraft from USS Block Island bearing down. When the submarine attempted its crash dive, something went fatally wrong. Captain Wilhelm Brauel fell dead to the deck, struck down instantly, and multiple crew members took wounds in the chaos. The U-boat's war diary, written in the days after, captured the crew's absolute shock. They had been caught completely unprepared, even though their detection gear had been working properly. The January 28, 1944 incident involving U-571 proved that the margin had shrunk to nearly nothing. Flight Lieutenant R.D. Lucas spotted U-571 through his radar scope at 12 miles distance. He guided his Sunderland through cloud cover to achieve complete surprise, then broke through the clouds at just 800 yards from the submarine. The U-571's conning tower was already starting to submerge when he released his weapons. As the submarine disappeared, the Sunderland's port wing struck the submarine's jumping wire with tremendous force. The impact sealed both vessels' fates. The submarine went down with 52 of her crew. The aircraft crashed into the sea with 11 men aboard. It was during Black May of 1943 that the real reckoning came. In that single month alone, the U-boat force lost 41 submarines, a catastrophe of unimaginable scale. The battle raging around convoy ONS-5 showed precisely why the situation had become impossible. 17 U-boats struck at that convoy between May 4th and 6th. 6 of them were sunk outright. 11 suffered damage that left them crippled and helpless. Yet not a single merchant vessel was lost to their attacks. The raw numbers told a story of complete transformation. The average warning time before aircraft appeared had dropped to just 8 seconds. The percentage of submarines that managed successful crash dives had fallen to 31%. Not a single U-boat achieved a successful torpedo strike during that 3-day battle. Admiral Donnett's handwritten entry on May 24, 1943, read like an admission of utter defeat. He wrote that the enemy's new detection systems and weapons had stripped away Germany's only real offensive tool. The submarine war would have to pause completely until new technology could restore the balance that had been lost. After May of 1943, U-boat operations became purely about staying alive rather than about attacking anything. The boats started remaining underwater for 20 hours or more each day, coming up only briefly to pull fresh air into the compartments and recharge their batteries. But even those short moments on the surface brought danger, as aircraft could appear within seconds and open fire. The snorkel device appeared in 1944, and it promised to end the requirement for full surfacing. But it created its own terrible problems. The operator had to maintain exact depth because going too deep would seal the intake valve and suck all the air out of the boat, creating a vacuum that could rupture eardrums with explosive force. Going too shallow meant the snorkel head broke the surface, making a visible wake that could be spotted from many miles away by watching aircraft. The statistics from 1944 showed how completely submarine warfare had transformed. Boats spent just 45 minutes on the surface per day now, compared to 16 hours back in 1942. Patrol speed had dropped to 4 knots from 10 knots 2 years earlier. Each U-boat sank less than one merchant vessel that year, whereas in 1942 they had averaged 12.5 ships per submarine lost. The compression of that crash dive window had consequences that reached far beyond simple losses in individual engagements. U-boats could no longer organize the coordinated pack attacks that had nearly strangled Britain. Attacking merchant traffic became impossible when submarines had to hide underwater for most of each day, crawling along at minimal speed. The Atlantic struggle's outcome had been determined by technology rather than tactics. Once that dive window closed completely, Germany's opportunity to starve Britain into surrender simply evaporated. American naval air squadrons evolved from amateurs into professional U-boat killers through deliberate training methods and constant technological improvement. At Jacksonville's Naval Air Station, crews repeatedly attacked actual submarines while instructors watched and recorded everything. Many attacks took longer than 35 seconds from first sighting to releasing weapons, and those crews had to do it over again until they got it right. By late 1943, American pilots were achieving one confirmed U-boat kill for every 40 attack sorties they flew, a huge improvement from the one kill per 200 sorties rate in 1942. The arrival of escort carriers meant that aircraft could now operate anywhere in the Atlantic. USS Bogue's pilots alone destroyed 13 U-boats over 2 years of operations. These modest-sized carriers proved conclusively that air power could be pushed into the mid-ocean and still remain effective. Lieutenant Commander Robert Hopgood helped shape American anti-submarine tactics, and later reflected on how completely different the work had become. He described thinking in seconds instead of minutes, refining every procedure to save fractions of time, knowing that German crews needed at least 20 seconds to get their boats underwater. His job was to deny them those seconds entirely. Squadron VPB-110 became the first American unit to use Lee lights, starting on January 10, 1945. The pilots mastered a clever deception technique, throttling back their engines as they approached to make distance seem greater than it really was, then suddenly pouring on full power for the final attack run. This psychological trick proved devastatingly effective against U-boat crews who were already broken by constant fear. Ultra-intelligence, derived from breaking German Enigma codes, completely changed the mathematics of U-boat survival. In June of 1941, Allied codebreakers first unlocked the Dolphin cipher, but they lost that advantage when the Germans introduced the four-rotor Shark cipher in February 1942. Then, in October 1942, two brave men made a desperate gamble. Lieutenant Francis Fasson and able seaman Colin Grazier boarded the sinking U-559 to recover the codebooks before they went down. Both men drowned when the submarine suddenly sank beneath them, but their sacrifice restored the code-breaking effort by December 1942. The impact of this restored intelligence was staggering. 73% of U-boats were intercepted while traveling to their patrol areas when ultra-information was available, compared to only 21% without it. Convoys could be routed around wolfpacks 67% of the time. The average time from when a U-boat reported its position to when aircraft attacked had dropped to just 4 hours. Even submarines that managed perfect crash dives only postponed their fate briefly. Hours later, when they surfaced again, the aircraft were waiting. The numbers show the complete transformation. In 1942, Germany held the advantage. 250 U-boats were operational. They sank 1,094 merchant vessels. The Allies lost 87 submarines. That meant each destroyed U-boat cost Germany 12.5 merchant ships. Pilots received 3 minutes of warning before aircraft appeared. 89% of submarines successfully dove when attacked. 1943 was the turning point. 425 U-boats operated that year. Only 363 merchant ships were sunk. 258 U-boats were destroyed. The exchange ratio had collapsed to 1.4 ships per U-boat lost. Warning time before air attack had compressed to 15 seconds. Only 31% of crash dives succeeded. By 1944, the situation had become hopeless. 375 U-boats were operational. A mere 132 merchant vessels went down. 344 U-boats were lost. The ratio fell to 0.38 merchant ships per U-boat destroyed. Warning time had shrunk to 5 seconds. Just 15% of crash dives worked anymore. Of all the U-boats Germany commissioned during the war, 1,962 were built. 785 never came home. That represented a death rate of 67.5%. Aircraft accounted for 250 of those losses, with another 100 destroyed in combined air and surface actions. The human toll was simply horrifying. 40,000 men served in U-boats. 28,000 of them died at sea. That was a 70% casualty rate, nearly 3 in 4. Herbert Werner served on 5 different submarines and somehow survived the entire war. He later wrote a memoir titled Iron Coffins, describing the journey from being confident attackers to being hunted prey. He wrote that they measured everything by seconds, the seconds between when somebody spotted them and when death arrived, and those seconds meant absolutely everything, right up until they meant absolutely nothing at all. Werner was one of only 7,000 who made it through alive. Decades after the war ended, his dreams were still haunted by the endless diving, his sleeping mind forever practicing the desperate maneuvers that had meant survival. A doctor named Paul Faffinger saved U-441 after a terrible attack on July 12, 1943. Severely damaged, the boat seemed doomed, but through desperate effort and cool thinking, he brought her home. After the war, he became a respected physician in Hamburg. In 1976, during an interview, he reflected that he had probably saved more lives during those 31 hours, bringing that damaged boat to safety, than during his entire medical career afterward. He remembered they had maybe 5 seconds warning when the boats attacked. 5 seconds between breathing air and meeting death. At a reunion of U-boat veterans in Munich during 1985, survivors shared their memories. Reinhard Hardigan, who had commanded U-123 during successful operations off the American coast, remembered the stunning reversal. In just months, they had transformed from hunters into hunted. The technology that had allowed them to vanish beneath the surface in seconds, their greatest advantage, had been stolen away. When those seconds disappeared, they became nothing but targets on the water. The U-boat experience carries lessons relevant to warfare today. Modern military systems depend on advantages just as thin and fragile as those crucial seconds once were. The fundamental truth remains unchanging. An advantage based on a narrow time margin carries an inherent weakness. Military strategists study how the U-boat force collapsed as a textbook case of how technology can disrupt everything. Today's stealth aircraft, cyber weapons, and submarines face identical vulnerabilities. The edge they provide lasts only until someone invents a way to counter it. The Type 7 ACU 995 remains preserved as a memorial at Les Baux near Kiel. Visitors can squeeze through the narrow passages where men once lived, counting heartbeats between detection and death. Bronze plaques honor the 28,000 German submariners who found their graves in the sea. The German U-boat crash dive represents one of history's starkest demonstrations of technology deciding military outcomes. Within just 12 months, between early 1942 and mid-1943, Allied weapons advancement compressed German escape time from multiple minutes to bare seconds to literally nothing. When centimetric radar finally eliminated warning completely in March 1943, the U-boat force stopped being a meaningful military threat. Personal stories within this technological revolution show what modern warfare costs. A doctor taking command of a crippled boat and fighting to bring her home. Gunners firing frantically, knowing their weapons couldn't possibly win. 2 aircraft and submarine locked together in mutual destruction. These events show how technology had turned individual bravery into mathematical certainty. The wider strategic consequences reached far beyond any single battle. When the escape window closed, Germany's last realistic chance to cut off Britain's supplies died with it. Churchill himself called the Atlantic struggle the deciding factor in the entire war. But victory came not through superior seamanship or courage, but through compressing reaction time via scientific progress. U-boats had entered the conflict with a powerful escape tool, the crash dive, which protected them from air attack. German naval strategy revolved around this advantage, enabling the pack tactics that came terrifyingly close to starving Britain. Yet the same scientific progress that had given submarines their underwater sanctuary took it away through radar, sonic detection, and acoustic weapons. Those disappearing seconds meant everything to the men who lived through it. They had staked their lives on a narrow window of time, then watched it vanish. In 1942, they possessed minutes of warning. Midway through 1943, that dropped to seconds. By 1944, they had nothing. The Atlantic was won in laboratories and factories, not just by ships at sea. British scientists building centimetric radar. American factory workers producing thousands of patrol aircraft. Allied intelligence teams cracking German codes. Together they closed the U-boat escape route. The victory was methodical and technical, rather than dramatic or heroic. Yet humanity remained visible throughout. American pilots dropping life rafts to Germans struggling in the water. U-boat crews staying at their posts despite impossible odds. Mutual respect between mortal enemies. These moments of human dignity amid mechanical slaughter showed that technology could never completely strip away humanity from combat. The submarine force that had started the war as Germany's proudest naval unit, confident in their ability to disappear beneath the waves, ended it shattered and broken. Of the young sailors who left French ports believing in victory, only 3 in 10 returned home alive. Technology had stolen the seconds they required. Modern nuclear submarines never surface, making the old crash-dive tactics obsolete, but they face their own technological dangers. Satellite surveillance watches constantly, acoustic detection networks listen underwater. Robotic vehicles may one day compress their survival margins exactly as radar and aircraft compressed those of their predecessors. The spirits of U-boat crews who believed they had seconds remaining serve as warning to anyone betting on technological superiority. In warfare's brutal mathematics, today's safety margin becomes tomorrow's fatal weakness, and today's winning advantage turns into tomorrow's liability. The ultimate irony cuts deepest. History's most successful submarine force was destroyed not by superior tactics or heroism, but by eliminating less than 1 minute of warning time. Those seconds, counted desperately by lookouts and measured precisely by engineers, lost completely to technology, determined whether nations would survive. The story of the 45-second crash dive demonstrates that in warfare, as in life, only change itself endures forever. The German submarine force paid an unspeakable price, learning this truth. 28,000 lives were lost when their safety margin compressed from minutes to seconds to absolute zero. Their sacrifice remains an eternal reminder of a single unchanging reality. In military technology, the seconds you depend on today cannot protect you tomorrow.